We've already given a bit of an intro. I mean, you've helped brands, over 100 startups find their brand strategies. I mean, you really know what you're talking about, and we really look forward to getting a little bit of insight from, with all that experience and knowledge that you have.
Yes.
So, would you just like to dive in with all the questions that we have?
Yeah, go for it. I'm all ready. Let's get going.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. So, our first question is from Neha. She said, what are the key differences between a brand strategy and a marketing strategy?
This is a question I get asked a lot. So I'm glad you asked it. It's a good opening question. Um, just to summarize and put it very simply, a brand strategy is what the bigger picture is for your brand. A marketing strategy is a day-to-day plan कि social media पे ये करना है, PR पे ये करना है, digital पे ये. So a brand strategy is really a strategy on how do you take your brand from 0 to 1. Why do your customers believe you? What should you say to them? What are some things that are essential to your brand that make you different? So a brand strategy is one level higher than a marketing strategy. It's usually more around like thinking about the audiences, your brand, the competition, how are you going to differentiate? And a marketing strategy is much more execution focused. So you need both of them. You need a brand and you need a marketing strategy for sure. It's just that do your brand strategy first because that will guide you in terms of what are you going to say in your marketing strategy.
Right. So, you, of course, you need a bigger picture first, and then you kind of narrow down into your marketing aspects.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
yeah.
Sounds good. That's really valuable insight because I think a lot of
Simple
people
answer.
kind of.
Keeping it really simple. That's what I like doing. I don't like giving you long answers which are meant for research papers. So very simply put, that's what it is.
No, I mean that's actually what's needed because we've read the papers and the articles and but I think for most people reading that and actually understanding that it's a huge difference. I mean that's where I think mentors like you can help because to actually understand what needs to be done and to understand break down that complicated topics without jargon, without actually having that knowledge. So how do we understand? How do we take that steps? I mean that's very interesting and needed actually. So we have another question from Rohit. He asks, "What do you think really makes a brand stand out in today's crazy competitive market?"
Very strong differentiation as well as knowing your customers as well as possible. Because a brand is only created when you can do two things. One is understand really what your customer is looking for, and second is now that you know what your customer is looking for and you see that there are 10 other products selling, for example, what can you do to differentiate and stand out from the market? Lot of times differentiation is taken as, oh, I'm just going to change something in my product, but that again doesn't matter as much because just changing something in your product is not a solid differentiation unless it's a full 90 degree, like a full 180. If it is something completely different compared to what the market is doing, then that is a very strong differentiation. But usually differentiation comes by understanding not just physically what they need like tangibly, but more around emotions and trying to figure out what is it that the customer really wants and how do you communicate that the best. So I think if you understand these two things, you'll be able to kind of differentiate and build a brand for the future.
Nice. That's very valuable insight. I think as humans, we tend to we focus more on our emotions, and as I believe there's some study that said humans tend to make decisions especially buying decisions and brand decisions with our emotions first, and then justify it with our money or everything else. So I think
Yeah,
that's
because the way that we function is that if a brand feels good to us or it seems like something we want, even if it satisfies 80 to 90% of what we're actually looking for, we'll still buy it because that brand gives us an emotion or a vibe or a feel that this brand is meant for us. Like, for example, there are brands that are in the same category, but then even in the same category, how they talk to different users is very different because that is where the differentiation starts, right? So for example, you take a Nike, Nike and you take an Adidas and you take a Bliss Club, right? Irrespective, even I'm just taking the clothing category as an example, each of them will talk to the same consumer differently, even though they're in the same category. So understanding the consumer and understanding how to differentiate and what differentiation matters to the consumer is like the core essence of why you need to understand strategy to be able to build a brand.
Nice. I mean, that's great advice, I think, for anybody who's trying to build a strategy. Thank you so much. Then we have another question from Rahila. She asks, "Hi, Vanshika. My question is, storytelling sounds fancy. How much of a big deal is it when it comes to building a brand? Can you share an example of a brand that's like the Shakespeare of storytelling and what magic it does to the audience?"
Yeah, so the reason why storytelling has become so important within brand strategy is because, unlike, I mean, maybe 50 years ago, right? Uh, there were very few brands that was differentiated enough that the consumer wasn't confused and didn't need an emotional pull. But now, because there are so many consumers with so many different needs, storytelling is the bridge between your brand and the consumer. And when it comes down to storytelling, the main reason behind it is that we don't understand just data points thrown at us. We understand something that matters to us on a very individual level, which is why, even when as a strategist, right, we don't look at demographics, for example, we look at Vanchika as a persona. Like, what would Vanchika do in her 9 to 9? Right. So when you drill that down and you understand your consumer really well, is when you're able to tell stories that matter to them. So, I mean, I can think of so many brands, but one of them that I've been recently reading about is Apple, because they recently did their, their annual event, and then they released a video on YouTube, if you haven't watched it yet, which is about the sustainability report. Um, you don't even find out that it's a sustainability report till maybe halfway down the line of the video, because they've told the story so beautifully in terms of what they want to do to help achieve their sustainability goals, that it doesn't seem like random data points actually when you watch it for the first time. But when you watch it again, you'll realize that, oh, this is why she said that, oh, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. Oh, this is why they said that, we're using recycled, upcycled and recycled plastic in all of our products. So, like, when you look at it, it's actually data points that they're trying to tell you, but the way they've packaged it together so beautifully is what makes storytelling the most beautiful part. Because just data and facts and random things thrown at us won't make us remember it, like, because we won't have any recall towards it. But if you think about it, like, if you think about, like, history as we learn it in school, right, it's all one big story, right? Imagine if I was a history teacher and I told you, this was happening in America, now we're just going to learn about America. This is what's happening in Europe, we're just going to learn about Europe. But a really good history teacher, what she'll actually do or he'll do is join it together, saying World War I is happening, therefore this happened in America, this happened in Japan, this happened here, and then it all just correlates and makes so much more sense. So same thing with brands, right? Every brand has USPs and differentiators that they want to convey. But then if you just go around saying my pants are the stretchiest pants, when you're doing yoga, nobody's going to understand it, nobody's going to remember it. But if you, for example, make a funny video where, like, a dog is doing like the regular, how dogs stretch, and then a human is stretching beside it, and you link it up into a story, right? And you build something about the fact that it is stretchable yoga pants without saying it is stretchable yoga pants, that is when your audience will remember you. So that is really where that magic spot is in terms of figuring out where you can really build that story. And building a story is something that you have to do with a lot of authenticity, because you can't just fake it. You can't just be like, oh, we have like so many colors and they're this and they're this and they're this, because at the end of the day, the product is the truth, right? Your product is the truth. The story is like a gift wrapping on top of your product. So product has to be good, and the story to sell the product also has to be good. And if those two match together is when you'll start seeing things such as people talking about your brand, or people repeat buying your brand, or people talking about it online. Because again, random data facts is not something that we can register, because every single day we're bombarded with so many different things in so many different aspects of our life. Like everybody has a home to take care of, everybody has parents, everybody has work. There's so many things that are happening in our life that random things just don't stick. It's almost like throwing something against a wall hoping it sticks, but it won't. A story just helps you combine, it helps you think about it from a consumer point of view, that what is it that this consumer cares about and why should they care about it, and then how do you package it on top of your product offerings so that the consumer is able to understand what your product is and remove that hesitation of buying. Because even if your product is 80 to 90% there, and they feel it's right, or it says something that's very interesting to you, you will still buy it. Another really good example is new age insurance brands. So for example, if you look at ACO in the US, ACKO, like they made insurance, which is such a boring space, into such a fun space. Another one is, I mean, Disney is a masterpiece at storytelling, right? Like, watch their movies or watch how they've built the Disney story. It's not just Disney World, it's the vibe, right? Like, whenever you think of Disney, you smile, you think of happy things, you think of your favorite characters. Yes, those are important in making the story, but the overall Disney story is an emotion of happiness and joy. And that's how they've correlated something as a place and a movie and things that you can buy into something so beautiful that irrespective of when you hear the brand, you always think of happiness. And I also obviously talk a lot about it on my LinkedIn. So if you haven't checked out my LinkedIn, definitely do. I talk a lot about brand, I talk a lot about storytelling, consumer behavior, a lot of the points that we talked about right now.
I mean, and that's great. I mean, I love the examples that you've given. I mean, yes, Disney is not a product. It's not a movie. It is an emotion. I mean, it's something that we've all grown up as a like with as a child. So it kind of evokes that emotion of nostalgia, of happiness, of magic and discovery, and everything like that. So I mean,
Yeah,
that's
so
very
much
valid.
more. Yeah.
I mean that's great, and I'm sure our audience has checked out your LinkedIn, and if you guys you haven't, please feel free, please check out her LinkedIn. She's a LinkedIn top voice, as we've already mentioned, and please, she definitely knows what she's talking about. So please do check out her profiles. So we'll just move on to next question. It's from Arman. It's like, in your experience, how do you navigate the cultural and regional differences when working with startups from different parts of the world to create a globally appealing brand? And I think that's very relevant in today's world because, it used to be we were regionally, geographically closed off, but now I think every brand is an international brand to some extent.
Yeah, great example of this is Netflix. Like, if you see their US marketing and their India marketing, it's very different. I think it goes down to understanding again cultural trends, like you mentioned, and the people. And obviously, like, who are you selling to, right? The reason why Netflix has changed or added certain types of pricing is because they understood how the Indian market works, which is an understanding on consumers, understanding of what competition is doing. Like, they will be constantly monitoring what Geo Cinema, Hotstar, Amazon Prime, what all they're doing, because at the end of the day, they're not trying to copy, but they're trying to get better than them in some way or the other, right? Every brand is trying to get better. So I think when you're doing brand strategy across geographies, you can't have a generic strategy because culturally people are different, right? Like, for example, and you might find in some parts, like India is a very social, like a culturally very social like place, right? Like, we're a very vibrant culture, we're very very loud as a culture, we're very out there, we enjoy every moment. But then you might find in other parts, like, they're very very closed off, very slow in life, very different ideals, different perspectives, different reasons why they're using the product. So once you understand that, will you be able to build a geographically targeted brand? But there always has to be a mother brand, which is the big Netflix, which runs all these little things, because Netflix can't change its purpose, mission, vision. Like, the brand core can't change irrespective of where you are. So you have to stick with that, but then you adjust the communication part of it. So even if you're building a global brand, right, there are some things that you have to stick through globally. Because if I went and talked to someone in the US and I'm like, oh, hey, do you know like Netflix, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, wait, that doesn't happen here. Or, they come up with a different answer. That means that you built a very broken brand, because there's nothing that aligns people across the world about a singular brand. So for example, like if you use Airbnb, irrespective of where you use it, the vibe, the feeling, the communication is tailored to you at that point, but it's not going to be the same somewhere else. I mean, even if you're selling a product, right, how Maggie is packaged in India is very different than how Maggie is packaged outside. Maggie's pricing changes, right? So these are all global strategies which come into play as you grow, but there has to be something holding the brand together, which is the core, which you can't change, as and when you wish, as per geography. You can change it if the mother brand changes its architecture, mother brand changes something, that's okay. But as a geography, if you're managing different geographies, what you're saying, how you're saying might change without shaking the fundamentals of what the brand is.
Yeah, very valid. I mean, I think that's what one of the main reasons why brands fail is when, like, people cannot connect to it, or like, different people connect to it differently. So that, I think, again, as you're talking about cohesiveness of the brand, like that falls apart.
Yeah,
So
you
when you're
can't
talking
just
about,
take a product and sell it somewhere else using the same logic, the same theory. Like for example, another thing that you could probably look at is, what does the income demographics look like in India, right? Because India is very vast when it comes to income differences, right? Like people in tier 3, tier 2, tier 1, right? Whatever you may call it, everybody's earning at a very different scale. So for example, like Netflix doing vernacular content, they might not be doing that anywhere else. But in India, for example, if you see India as we know it, and then there's an entire Bharat that people know or don't talk about, right? But Bharat is the largest, like Bharat is larger than India. So that's why, for example, Netflix has started doing like vernacular content. They started producing shows which are in vernacular languages. They started doing subtitles, voiceovers. Like in other countries, they might not do that. But in India, because we're so geographically, demographically different, we as a country need that. Because if they, for example, didn't have Netflix produced Hindi movies, or Netflix, voiceovers and subtitles in Hindi, they lose out a large base of consumers, because not everybody talks English, right? As much as we like to think that everybody is fluent in English, that's not the reality. So these minor things will come after a lot of consumer research, understanding what is it that makes each consumer different. How is it that how do you generalize it enough that you're not just creating something, say, for Northeast India, right? But you're creating for the entire India, or even Southeast Asia as a whole becomes one region in a lot of companies. So the question is like, how do you target for that particular consumer in that particular region where they feel that this product is for them? That is the end goal of brand strat, right? So it's a very big question, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of skill to be able to do this, because um it's hard enough to understand one consumer set. Now you add 5 6 others, it becomes even harder.
yeah, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, you have more experience with that, I think, helping brands, but I think, like, it's so complicated. And I think all of us struggle with just building our brand, and, like, as opposed to having multiple different personas, multiple different audiences, that becomes very difficult. So in terms of talking about personal brand, how do you think personal branding differs from, like, brand branding, I suppose, like, because as you're a LinkedIn top voice, so like, you have experience with building your own personal brand, like, where you are the product, you are the brand, like, the this, as opposed to saying helping this. How do you think professionals build and maintain can build their personal brands effectively?
I think fundamentally it is the same. Obviously, things differ. You're not going to write a brand book for a personal brand, but when you're building your personal brand, I think it's a lot about introspection. If you're working with a client, it's asking them the right questions. as to what kind of a person are they, how do they sound, what matters to them, why does it matter to them, what kind of topics do they feel confident talking about over and over. Because building a personal brand is not just about posting about it once, it's about posting about it like 100, 200 times, right? Like I've been on LinkedIn for 10 years. I started using LinkedIn in about 2016, and we're in 2023 now. I got the LinkedIn Top Voice in 2021. And I got Top Brand Strategy Voice about 2 weeks ago. So it's not about just posting once and being like, "Acha, chalo, authority ban jayega." You have to be really passionate. You have to be really knowledgeable. You have to be able to dissect information well. You have to be able to write well. Building a personal brand online is very, very hard actually, because it requires you to put out a persona of yourself that is just as good as meeting you in person. One of the biggest things that I tell people who I also like, I take on very few CXOs, and I tell them the same thing, that like, you want to sound cool and you want to sound hip and you want to sound trendy. But if somebody meets you tomorrow at a supermarket and you don't sound like those things, that is when your personal brand will fall apart. Like you have to be as authentic. If you are a straightforward person, just be like that online. Like I am. I'm very no bullshit, very to the point, very honest, very open to sharing. And if you meet me in person, I'm the same way. So that's where the connect happens. Your personal and your offline brand have to match up to be able to build a really authentic brand.
Nice. I think that also helps because if you are authentic, I think it also helps you to sustain your brand longer, and like it becomes easier because it's much easier to be authentic on camera, off camera, everywhere, as opposed to having multiple different personas. Because of course, at the given time, which persona are you trying to pretend to be at that minute?
Yeah, exactly. Like what you say online has to depict what you are offline. What you say offline has to depict what you are online. There has to be that very close match, which is why even when you're hiring a ghostwriter, or if you are a ghostwriter, like for one of my clients, right? Like when I initially started off, they were talking about mental health and they're all about corporate wellness and all of that. And I was like, it's a new field for me. I know how to write, I know how to build a brand, but it has to sound like you. So instead of sending me Excel spreadsheets of like, this is what I want to write, I told her to send me voice notes. And even if those voice notes were 10 minutes long, that is completely okay. But then I could pick on words that she would actually use. I would pick up on emotions. I would be like, okay, she really cares about this. How do I build this out properly? I would listen for concepts that she's building, right? And a lot of things get lost when you're typing it out versus when you're sending a voice note. So that really helped build that authenticity with her, because she was already very well known and all of that. But she was just about starting building her personal brand. So that authenticity and that link, because she's doing workshops, she's doing corporate trainings, she can't sound like a different person online and offline. So that's why those voice notes really helped. And another thing is also like, you can't build a personal brand in a silo, right? If you are building a personal brand, people are going to reach out to you for advice. You are going to want to talk to people. You are going to want to connect with investors and maybe collaborators and people that can help you grow. So you have to have that open mindset, because it's as good as walking into a room which is filled with people you want to network with. There's no difference. You're just doing it online instead of offline. That's the only difference. So think of it that way. Think of it like it's a, I mean, best example would be to think of it like, what do you call it? I forgot the word. Where it's like a virtual game, right? Like you're virtually networking in a room and your avatar is there. How would you act? And then you put your personal brand behind it. I think that's the best way to think about it.
That's a great example. I think some everybody can kind of utilize. I mean, that's I don't think anybody would have thought of it that way,
Yeah.
building it avatar. I mean, that's great. So we'll just move on to the next question. It's from Jared. It's like, hello, ma'am. Could you share some practical tips for startups or small businesses with limited budgets on how they can effectively develop and execute a brand strategy?
So, I mean, building a brand strategy requires someone to think about a brand strategically. So, go read books, go watch YouTube videos, talk to a strategist, get on a consultation call with me, for example, because a lot of people are good at building product. Maybe they're good at marketing, maybe they're good at sales, maybe they're good at finding value chains. But building a brand strategy for your company, I mean, it's not something that you should save money on. I would say spend money on it because it's the lifeline of your business, right? If you're building a brand that you want to exist for like the next 50 or 100 years, you want it to be something that has a deeper meaning and a strong core. So because see, marketing, sales, distribution, ops, everybody does, everybody will figure it out, everybody will find their own way. But if you don't have anything solid to sell at the core, and you're not selling to a particular mindset of people, your product is going to fail even before you get to your marketing and sales. And I mean, a lot of people nowadays have started pushing budgets towards performance and getting money through ads and all of that. But honestly, since I am in brand, I understand organic, I understand paid. It's a fallacy, because if you actually zoom out 10,000 feet, performance is basically, I feed the engine 100 rupees, it gives me 1,000 rupees. I feed it 200, it gives me 2,000. So either way, you're paying somebody, like the CAC, right? Your customer acquisition cost. You're paying that to somebody, right? And that is not how you really build a brand. It's a good supplemental way to build awareness and build conversions and all of that. But then again, like, even if you're doing performance, what are you going to say to your audience? How are you going to convince them? That is what brand strategy will help you with. So instead of thinking about saving money on it, spend money on it. Like, people try and cut corners with packaging, for example, right? Like, so many people reach out to me, and I think one in every maybe 7 to 10 people we close, because we don't do packaging for cheap. I don't want to do it for cheap because it requires a lot of thought. It's not as simple as chocolate hai chocolate ka wrapper bana do. It's not as simple as that, right? If I did that for you and you are on a shelf in a supermarket and nobody really finds the need to even go touch your product or look at it, your packaging has failed. So all of these things matter, and they matter very deeply because they play with psychology. It's not as simple as I just want to sell a product and make a lot of money. It's that you need to find meaning in your product to be able to sell to a customer, and that has to have meaning for them. So till you find what does my product mean to me and why should it matter, and the second part, which is how do I add meaning to my consumer's life, till those two match up, like, you're probably going to make a lot of money. You might have a brand of sorts, whatever you think of, but it's not something that is sustainable. It'll be like, okay, you make a lot of money, but how many people are buying it again? How many people are abandoning their carts online? How many people are telling their friends about it, right? These are metrics that you look at from a brand perspective, not a company perspective. Because if people are not talking about your brand, if you're not getting any PR releases, if your brand is not social media famous organically, which means that you haven't bought followers and you still have a following, that is people coming to you irrespective of how slow your brand progress is, right? These things are things that you can't, they don't teach you this in B school. They only teach you कि social media banao, get a lot of followers, show people all of these metrics. But so many brands are faking it. So many brands. It's so easy to see through as a consumer. Like, I visited a brand's page today. They had like some 300K followers. Their engagement was like 5 likes, 50 likes on a reel. I'm like, bro, ये क्या है? तुमने क्या बनाया है? Like, metrics क्यों लगाया है? Why did you buy followers? It's so obvious. Because even if it showed it to 1/10 of the audience, out of 300,000, at least 1,000 तो likes आने चाहिए. 50 likes क्यों है? Right? So these are things that I look at from a brand perspective. And as a consumer, start getting more aware about brands that are playing tricks on you, because there are a lot of ways to mess around with the market, but you will be very easily able to tell. I mean, it happens on LinkedIn also. LinkedIn also, unfortunately, has gotten bots on it and all, where people just comment like, interested, very nice perspective, thumbs up. Like, all of that is bullshit, and you can just see through it that somebody's put their post through a bot. My post, okay, like, I'm just telling you hard reality. Like, I have 100K followers, right? I've been on LinkedIn for 10 years. I have about 22,000 connections. But like, my posts sometimes get 30 likes, 50 likes, 150 likes. And that is completely okay, because I don't pay for stuff. I don't put it through bots. I don't even promote it anywhere. What it is organically is what you see. And you'll see comments where people have written paragraphs. That can't be faked. You can't fake a paragraph, because a bot only will go incredible content, amazing post. very inspirational, right? And those things are easy to see through, irrespective of if you're doing it on LinkedIn or Instagram. But building a brand requires a lot of thought, it requires a lot of understanding, it requires a lot of thinking forward for the customer and for your brand. It's not as easy as it looks, which is why invest the money that you need to invest in it, because that's what will take you to the next step. Because, like, I mean, the next step for a lot of people is getting funding. How are you going to get funding if you can't show metrics? And your metrics, if they're purely based on performance, like, hey, I spent 20% of my budget on organic and 80% on performance, no investor is going to invest, because that's not a sustainable model. Your brand should be able to sustain itself irrespective of how much money you're putting in performance or anything that is digital marketing related. If your brand doesn't sustain that way, it's not a solid brand, it's just any other brand that anybody else could have built. So that's the main difference.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, thank you for breaking that down such a simpler way. I think that anybody can follow through on that. All right. So we have another question from David. It's like, good evening, ma'am. How do you go about figuring out what's special about a brand, like its unique value, what is its USP? Got any tips for businesses struggling with this?
um so there are two types of differentiation, right? One is tangible stuff that you can see in the product, and the second is where do you want to emotionally differentiate. So the first one is very easy, the second one requires a lot of thinking, because differentiation is always in the mind and not always in the product. Like, why do you think say for example, like if you take two hotels, right? You take, say, a Taj hotel and you take a Hilton, right? Even though they're both 5 star, why do you perceive them differently? I mean, they're both 5 stars. They both should have superior service. They both should be, customer centric and all of that, right? But in your head, when you think of a Hilton and a Taj, why do you think of it differently? That is a question that brand will help you with. And it's not always that brand has to be the thing that leads differentiation. Differentiation can also come from customer service, right? Like, great customer service. Differentiation could also be that we have a 24/7 chat bot, and that is what makes our product special. Differentiation could be along the lines of, if for example, like if you buy it and something happens to it, we offer you a full rebate. So differentiation is not always just product differentiation. There's a lot of things that can differentiate you from the market. So it's basically understanding what the competition is doing and what you can do differently, irrespective if your product is 1% or 10% different. Because product wise, like, a lot of times, right, like if you just take out the label of any brand and you put two brands together for a blind test, nobody would be able to say that this is this and this is this. But suddenly when you put a brand name on it, they become different. And product wise, there's just a lot of similarity. So that's why product differentiation now is very hard to do. um Emotional differentiation, CX, features if you're a SaaS product, anything else that adds to the customer's life can be a differentiating point. So you have to think for your target audience, exactly what is it that they want. And this is obviously a very long drawn out conversation. And I do take consultation calls, happy to chat with entrepreneurs that are listening. There's a link on my LinkedIn, you can go and book it out. And because, see, I can't a lot of these questions, right? They're very generic, and generic advice is available anywhere. So unless you come and tell me that I'm in the clothing segment, I'm building for adolescents, I'm competing with, say, Sheen and so and so and so and so, then I can tell you that, okay, this is what I think of these brands. Therefore, your brand should do something like this. Because generically, I mean, there are millions of ways to differentiate, but what would be best for your brand would be something I'd be able to tell you on a one-to-one.
So that's a very valid point. Of course, this is this is just a generalize this because you're talking to from one to many people at this point. But
Yeah.
of course, you'll be able to help them much, really well if you can talk to them personally and get more insights onto what exactly they need help with. That's great. I mean, guys, if anybody needs more consulting or more direct advice, please feel free to reach out to her. As she's already mentioned her LinkedIn. please feel free to go on it and book a consultation if you like.
Yes.
So I think we'll just close out with one last question. We've taken a lot of your time anyway.
No.
We'll just say in the era of viral content, what's your take on memes and pop culture references in branding? Can they be a hit or a miss?
Depends. I mean, depends what kind of a brand you are. I mean, that's the first question to figure out, is this relevant to my audience? And if yes, then what level of it can you push it to? Because there is obviously, like, we know viral marketing, we've heard of moment marketing and all of that, right? But if every brand is posting about Chandrayaan reaching the moon, do you really need to add to the clutter? Right? Ask yourself that question. Like, Backstreet Boys comes to India, for example, every brand is posting about it. Do you really need to post about it? Like, ask yourself these questions: that does it really matter to my audience? Do they really care? Do they need to see another social media post? Unless your brand is super correlated, right? Like, for example, if you are a boys band and you Backstreet Boys is coming to India, and you do a very good, like, say a replica or whatever you call it, and you say that, hey, we're welcoming the Backstreet Boys, then it makes sense for your brand. But if you're selling glue and Backstreet Boys comes to India, I mean, what are you going to say? We're the glue that helped Backstreet Boys stay together. Like, that is so irrelevant. So unless your brand really has something to do with what's happening, don't talk about it. It doesn't matter.
I mean, that's a really good point because I think a lot of brands do tend to kind of cash in on that viral moment that's happening so that they can get those eyeballs. But it's true. I mean, like how many of them actually convert, and how many of that will actually those eyeballs will actually help your brand, or actually this they'll see a post, they'll like, and
Just
they'll go off.
Yeah, they'll forget it in a day, and like all that time and effort you spend. I'll tell you something, like, I've talked to a bunch of social media people around when Chandrayaan was happening. They created multiple social media posts in every instance of what could happen. And I'm like, that's such a waste of time. You could have done something else with your time. Right? Like, did your brand really need to talk about it? Like, the question is, and the emphasis is really. And if really, then okay, then it makes sense that you spend time ideating on every possible scenario, like landed, didn't land, almost landed, right? Like, you think of scenarios and you build, because in that moment you have to post. So it makes sense. You don't want to do something instant. But like, again, if it's not relevant to your brand and your brand is just trying to force fit yourself in there, don't do it. But I mean, given that we have a lot of very quick ways to produce content nowadays, if your brand feels like it can start a trend and something that is relevant to your audience and something that is mass enough that it's not just a particular segment, then I mean, that is something that I would push for, rather than, Chandrayaan landed, okay, it's G20, okay, like every day there's something happening in the world. But does everybody need to be bombarded by every brand posting about the same thing, is the question.
I think that's very valid. I think because I think a lot of people, times what happens is when they create all this, you kind of tend to actually turn off your audience that you actually have built with that, the entire hard work that you originally put, because they, as you said, consumers are smart. They see through all of this. They will like, oh, yet another post on this, or yet another this. So I think sometimes I think what can happen is you kind of, it'll be counterintuitive because you're doing this to kind of get more eyeballs and get all this, but at the same time you end up alienating your authentic audience as
Yeah,
opposed to this.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, same with festivals, right? Today there's Diwali, tomorrow there's Navratri, day after there's Dussehra. Like, do you really need to post about it? Like, this is something that I ask everybody. Like, just because you're a social media manager doesn't mean you have to, right? Like, ask yourself, like, does this really matter to my audience? I think that is the core question, and that will answer half of the things, and most of them will come back with, no, this doesn't matter, let's not post. It's a good check to have in your mind, like, as a brand, if you're running a brand on social or ads or whatever, like, keep asking yourself, because it's not just the brand wants to say, there has to be someone to listen. And if that other side that wants to listen is seeing 100 of these posts, do they really have the mind space for the 101th post, right? Like, if not, just ignore it and move on.
Very valid. I mean, I think that's great advice for anybody who's on social media as opposed to just brands. I mean, are you actually adding something, or are you just one of the one of the noises out there?
Clutter makers, as I call them, like, just people who have to post because they have to post because something happened in the world. Like, those are pages I instantly unfollow. I'm like, नहीं सुनना है यार, एक और नहीं सुनना है मेरे को.
The correct, because I think वही है कि इतने, like, we have so much going on, as you previously, like, we have families, we have responsibilities, we have jobs. I mean, like, we don't have the time, energy, and effort to actually go through all of this. I mean, like, कि हाँ ठीक है, हो रहा है. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it. So again, as like, as one of the audiences, like, do I need to care? Do I need to know? Is definitely something that plays. So thank you so much, Anshika. I believe we'll let you go. We've already taken a lot of your time, but thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing such amazing insight. It was a great session.
Thank you. I look forward to connecting with whoever's watching. Find me on LinkedIn. It's not hard to find me. Let's connect up. Let's chat. Let me see if I'm more than happy to see if I can help your brand in any way. Because there are a lot of things that, like I said, right? Like there's only so many things an entrepreneur can know and have knowledge within. And if you feel that, there's someone that can help you with whatever you're struggling with, it's better to talk to someone, get their advice, and if you want, partner with them and build something that is sustainable and something that will last for really long. Because there's no point building with a short-term vision. Like no brand started out saying, I just want to sell a lot of product for 2 years. Like nobody said that. If they did, we wouldn't have like the Amul and the Disney and the Airbnb, like Zoom. We wouldn't have these things, right? If their vision was just product बेचना है बहुत पैसे कमाना है. That's not how it works. So yeah, happy to chat. Reach out on LinkedIn.
Sounds good. I mean, you've heard it, guys. Heard directly from Vanshika. Please feel free to reach out to her. She'll definitely help your brand. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Vanshika. Thank you once again for
Take
coming
care.
in.
Have a good weekend, everyone.